On 11th of August 2011, in San Francisco, the mobile network stopped working inside 4 of the underground stations. Not by fault, not by attack. The transit agencies expected the protest, so they asked the phone companies to switch the service off. I'm Nicola, this is the blueprint, and this is the fourth wall. And they did. 3 hours in the middle of Thursday evening commute in downtown of San Francisco. Nobody jammed anything. Jamming is illegal in the United States. Nobody break in, cut a cable, or seize a device. Someone made a request and someone else typed something. The protest never happened. You cannot organize what you cannot coordinate. The regulator opened a review. Civil liberty groups failed to complain. The agency said it was legal and about the passenger's safety.
Shelter, power, water. And now, the thing you would use to tell anyone that the first 3 were being taken from you. Connection is not like the others. A house can be lost slowly. A meter can be read for months before it is used. But a network goes from working to not working in the time it takes to run a command. And unlike a flow restrictor clamped onto a pipe, it leaves nothing behind to photograph. The scale is not hypothetical, and it is not decreasing. In 2025, researchers documented at least 313 internet shutdowns across 52 countries. That is the highest number ever recorded. And it means something more specific than a large number. Not a single day of that year passed without at least one deliberate shutdown somewhere in the world. Myanmar, 95. India, 65. The highest of any democracy on earth, and the lowest India has recorded since 2017. Since 2016, India alone accounts for more than 900 of them. Around 40% were tied to armed conflict. The rest were tied to elections, to protests, to exams, to religious festivals, to ordinary administration. And here is the part that matters for you, wherever you're watching this from. The switch is not exotic hardware installed by an authoritarian state. It is a standard capability of every modern telecommunications network. The difference between a country that uses it 95 times a year and a country that has never used it is not engineering. It is policy. Now watch what happens when the law tries to close the gap. In 2020, India's Supreme Court delivered what is still, arguably, the strongest judicial protection of internet access anywhere in the world. The case was brought by a newspaper editor whose Srinagar edition had stopped printing after the shutdown in Jammu and Kashmir. The court ruled that access to the internet is protected under the right to freedom of expression and the right to carry on a trade. It ruled that indefinite shutdowns are impermissible. It ruled that every suspension order must be published, time-limited, and reviewed. Read that again because it is genuinely a good ruling. And then read what it does not say. It does not say the state may not switch the network off. It says the state may switch the network off, provided the decision is proportionate, documented, and periodically renewed. The court did not order the connection restored. The most protective legal outcome available on this subject, anywhere, is a requirement to complete the paperwork correctly. So build your own. That is the reasonable response. Buy the hardware yourself. Put a dish on your roof and connect to something in orbit, above every national network and every domestic regulator. In October of 2025, SpaceX announced that it had proactively identified and disabled more than 2,500 Starlink terminals in the vicinity of suspected scam compounds in Myanmar. 2,500 devices, bought, shipped across borders, carried up ladders, bolted to roofs, aimed at the sky, and paid for every month, switched off from orbit. And the reason was good. Those compounds were running fraud operations staffed in many cases by trafficked people. This is not a story about a villain. That is precisely why it belongs here. Because the question was never whether the decision was right. The question is what the decision required. It required no warrants served at a door, no engineer sent to a site, no physical access to a single one of those dishes. It required someone at a company to decide and a list to be applied. And there is a technical detail worth understanding because it closes the last exit. These restrictions operate on the terminal's reported position, the physical coordinates the dish transmits when it asks the constellation for permission to speak. A VPN operates at the network layer, on traffic that has already been allowed to flow. It sits above the place where the decision is made. You can own the hardware completely and own none of the connection. I want to be precise here because precision is the whole point of this series. 3 of the 4 walls I have actually worked on. The water is real. It comes from a spring above the house, down a pipe I laid myself, moved by gravity. No meter, no allowance, no number that can reach 0. I showed you that system in the last episode and none of it was staged. The power is partly mine. Panels, lights, a solar water heater. Not everything, but enough that a bad day on the grid is an inconvenience here rather than a crisis. That is partial independence, and I have never had a reason to claim more than that. It took years, it is unglamorous, and it is real. Which is exactly why I want you to hear the next part properly. When I tell you the 4th wall is the one I have not got past, I am not being modest. I am telling you which problem is actually hard. The first 3 I could solve with my hands. Water is a pipe and a slope. Power is a panel and some sunlight. Those are physics, and physics does not require anybody's permission. Connection is not physics. Connection is somebody else's network every single time. And I know precisely how that network behaves because it is what I do for a living. My work is industrial automation and production planning. I spend my days on systems that monitor their own state, report it upward, and can be halted remotely by someone who is nowhere near them. That is not a conspiracy. That is Tuesday. It is also why none of these 4 episodes surprised me. A remote stop is one of the first things you design into any serious system, not because you intend to use it, but because a machine you cannot halt from a distance is a machine nobody will sign off on. The flow restrictor in California, the remote lockout in Colorado, the terminal list applied from orbit. An engineer looks at those and does not see a plot. He sees standard practice, correctly implemented. The technology is not the villain here, and I would be lying to you if I said it was. What changes is where the principle gets installed. A remote stop on a production line protects people. The same remote stop on a household does something else entirely. It quietly moves that household from something you have to something you are currently permitted to use. And that is why I cannot build my way out of this one. I can dig a trench. I can bolt a panel to a roof. I cannot manufacture a network. and neither can you. If the connection stops, I still have the mountain, the spring, and the panels, and no way to tell you that any of it happened. What I have is a smaller dependency and an accurate map of where it begins. That is not freedom. It is the difference between being disconnected and being surprised. 4 walls, shelter, taxed and mortgaged until ownership becomes a subscription you never finish paying. Power, throttled from a control room by a decision you were told you had agreed to. Water, reduced from 30 gallons a minute to 1 by a metal disc with a hole in the middle. And connection, the wall that decides whether anyone ever hears about the other 3. None of these required new technology. Every one of them existed as a capability long before it was used. The flow restrictor was machined in a workshop. The kill switch shipped inside the meter. The network suspension is a standard function of every carrier on Earth. What changed was never the hardware. What changed was who was permitted to decide and how little that decision now costs them. So the question at the end of this series is not what you own. Ownership has turned out to be the weakest thing on the list. The Myanmar terminals were owned outright, and it made no difference at all. The question is what still works when nobody approves of you. Your roof, your water, your power, your voice. Is your connection a property or a permission? This is the blueprint.